B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, March 7th, 2019. Did you know that Washington lawmakers are united against hate? There's an asterisk on it, as you clearly can anticipate. So at this hour, and it's 2:15 Pacific time on Thursday, March 7th, I haven't seen any news reported on a vote in the House of Representatives on the resolution sparked by attacks on Congresswoman Ilhan Omar for anti-Semitic comments that she never made. And this effort to smear her into silence, aided and abetted by Democratic leaders who are proving her point that they respond more to concerns about the influence of those who support Israel in this country than they do about the free speech rights of one of their own party members. And as you've heard over the last few days, I find this demagoguery deeply troubling. And I believe that it is a real black mark on the Democratic Party. And so at this hour, it is a little confusing. There was a promise of a vote today, but then there's been discussion that they may not have been able to get the caucus to agree on a specific resolution. The anti-Semitism rejection has been watered down with also rejection of Islamophobic remarks and hate speech by white nationalists. And at that point, it becomes somewhat meaningless to the self-identified Jewish leaders in the House who have deep support for AIPAC and Israel. And so I don't have a clear idea of whether the resolution will be brought up for a vote. And the Democrats seem to be intent on trying to clear the decks and get this out of the way. They don't want the story to linger, and they have big plans tomorrow. They would like to make news by passing H.R. 1, which is loaded with some great ideas to reform elections and reform the ethics standards that we try to apply to our elected leaders. And it is dead on arrival. Sure, it'll make a statement. It'll help define the aims and the aspirations of Speaker Pelosi and the new House majority of Democrats. But beyond that, it's not going to pass in the Senate. And unlike the leaders, I would like to see us linger here. And sure, it's painful. And yes, there is a political cost to being divided over issues related to Israel. But this is that teachable moment, the conversation we should have, and to apply selective political correctness to a Muslim member of Congress is, to me, the height of hypocrisy and misguided efforts. So Nancy Pelosi is trying to say that this resolution doesn't name Ilhan Omar. It's not about her. It's about these forms of hatred, quoted the speaker. She went on to say, I do not believe she understood the full weight of her words. Now, that is infantilization, and it's also a mischaracterization of the words she uttered. And I guess I have to repeat this. Ilhan Omar was talking about herself, about the pressure applied to her on a daily basis to conform. And she expressed it in terms of pledging allegiance to AIPAC and to the right-wing Likud government of Israel. And Pelosi said, I do not believe she understood the full weight of the words. I feel confident her words were not based on anti-Semitic attitude. But come on, Nancy. She didn't say anything anti-Semitic. It is the super-sensitive people who typically operate as bullies, in my view, demanding support for the state of Israel in an extreme manner by those elected to the U.S. Congress. And that's epitomized by Ted Deutsch, the Florida Democrat. There's too much hatred, too many people are targeted. We need to support all of them. But we are having this debate because of the language of one of our colleagues, language that suggests Jews like me who serve in the U.S. and Congress and whose father earned a Purple Heart, that we're not loyal Americans. She did not say that. She didn't infer it. And so what we have is a group of people who are claiming that they can interpret the intentions of a person who speaks words that they interpret to be offensive, demeaning, or hurtful to them. And this just takes us in infuriating circles. So as of this hour, I don't have confirmation that there has been a vote or what the outcome might be. And things got a little more complicated today when James Clyburn of South Carolina, an African-American Democratic whip, gave an interview to the Hill newspaper. He said that Omar, who fled the war in her native Somalia as a child, spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya, that she had more personal experiences with bigotry than those who are generations removed from the Holocaust, the Japanese internment camps of World War II, and the other violent episodes of the past. So he's saying, I'm serious. There are people who tell me, well, my parents are Holocaust survivors. My parents did this. It's more personal with her. I've talked to her, and I can tell you she is living through a lot of pain. Now, of course, the immediate spin from a person who who appears to be injured by this, Congressperson Lee Zeldin of New York, who is identified in this news article as Jewish. Mr. Clyburn's comments are disgusting, making light of the Holocaust and minimizing its massive importance and impact on victims' families, survivors, and the world. He did no such thing. He didn't make light of it. He said it was generations ago, and this is a woman who has personally experienced that kind of treatment because of her faith and because of her native country. And so, once again, I fear that because the Democrats buckled and didn't support Ilhan Omar, that the Republicans will take this one all the way to town. Exhibit A, Bret Stephens, the former editor of the Jerusalem Post, who's an opinion columnist for the New York Times, and he has continued to ignore my tweet from Sunday, where I asked him that if I criticized Chuck Schumer and Bob Menendez, both U.S. senators, both stout supporters of Israel, would I be only half anti-Semitic because Menendez isn't Jewish? Well, I don't expect a tweet back from Bret Stephens. But his column today is ugly sniping. And he opens with this one. There's an old joke about upper-class British anti-Semitism. It means someone who hates Jews more than is strictly necessary. Now that is a twisted comment. I don't even consider it a joke. And he connects that to Ilhan Omar, the freshman representative, more than meets the progressive American version of that standard. So he's saying that she hates Jews more than is strictly necessary. Now, this whole frame is offensive to me because I don't hate Jews, and to say that one might hate them more than is strictly necessary, that is just really, really bizarre. And then he tries to turn the tables saying, well, Omar doesn't like Israel, and that's a shame, because it's the only country that embraces democratic values. When was the last time there was a gay pride parade in Ramallah, a women's rights march in Gaza, or an opposition press in Tehran? This is completely irrelevant, because the Palestinians don't have the kind of influence in the United States that Israel does. And so this is just so bizarre. It's not worthy of being published by the New York Times or even by the Drudge Report. And so I find him hard to argue with because his arguments are not rational. He also claims that anti-Zionism has abruptly become an acceptable point of view in reputable circles. It's why anti-Semitism is just outside the frame, bidding to get in. Well, Zionists need to get used to the idea that not everybody agrees with them. Not everybody believes that Zionism allows the state of Israel to conduct itself as an apartheid state, disproportionately bombing Gaza or West Bank communities at will. And so both Bret Stephens and my next combatant here, Tom Friedman, make noises about freedom of speech and respect for Omar's differences. And then they proceed to trash them. And I don't typically read Tom Friedman anymore. Back during the Iraq War, he used to predict that just give us 6 months and everything will be fine. And he made that prediction 6 times and he was wrong. And I find him to be a curious figure. Because in this comment, he says, look, I've got a connection to Ilhan Omar because I grew up in the district that she represents in Minnesota. And we have one other thing in common. He says, we both don't like the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and have spoken in very blunt language about its strong-arm political tactics. And then he separates himself and goes into a rambling rant here. I don't like AIPAC because I strongly believe in the right of the Jewish people to build a nation-state in their ancient homeland. I believe AIPAC for many years has not only become a rubber stamp for the right-wing policies of Netanyahu, resulted in tens of thousands of Israeli settlers ensconced in the heart of the West Bank, imperiling Israel as a democracy. Yes, Tom Friedman does have some rational thoughts, and he does appear to be able to separate his personal loyalty to Israel from his role as an American journalist and commentator. He says, AIPAC does not represent my feelings as an American Jew, but neither does Representative Omar. What? Nobody suggested that she should reflect his views. This is as disingenuous as what I just read to you from Bret Stephens. What are these guys, what are they on? And then he makes inferences. Everything I have heard from her leads me to conclude that she dislikes AIPAC because she dislikes Israel, because she does not really believe the Jewish people have a right to an independent state in their ancestral homeland. And she seems to support BDS. Now, he does accurately portray that during her campaign, she kind of ducked the issue of BDS, and after she was elected, she embraced it publicly. But beyond that, Tom Friedman's column here is a whole lot of gibberish, and he applies double standards to himself and to Congresswoman Omar. I am glad to see that because of the pressure of the presidential political race, the Democratic candidates Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren have spoken up, and their comments are all a little different. Here is Senator Harris from California. We all have a responsibility to speak out against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, racism, and all forms of hatred and bigotry. But like some of my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus, I am concerned that the spotlight being put on Congresswoman Omar may put her at risk. Now, do you notice she doesn't defend the right of Omar to speak or the fact that she is being smeared for comments she never made? Bernie Sanders was a little bit more accurate in his comment. Anti-Semitism is a hateful and dangerous ideology which must be vigorously opposed in the U.S. and around the world. We must not, however, equate anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the right-wing Netanyahu government in Israel. Rather, we must develop an even-handed Middle East policy which brings Israelis and Palestinians together for a lasting peace. Okay. Elizabeth Warren. Americans have a moral duty to combat hateful ideologies in our own country and around the world, and that includes both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. In a democracy, we can and should have an open, respectful debate about the Middle East that focuses on policy. Now that is a carefully crafted statement that skirts any reference to Congresswoman Omar or the efforts to smear her based on comments she has not made. And get this, I'm waiting to hear some sorts of outrage from the Democrats and Republicans, if they will, who are so upset by Omar speaking the truth while not expressing any kind of attitude toward Jews. A decision by Israel's Electoral Committee to ban an Israeli Arab list and a left-wing candidate from running in the elections for the Knesset, while allowing an extreme right-wing candidate to run in contradiction to a recommendation from the country's Attorney General, was announced today. The Israeli Electoral Committee barred the Balad United Arab list, which had been predicted to win around 5 seats in the Knesset, and they blocked Ofer Kasif, the only Jewish candidate, on the mostly Arab Hadash Tal list. Then they turned around and rejected the recommendation of the Attorney General and declared eligible to run, put on the ballot, Michael Ben-Ari, the leader of the far-right party Otzma Yehudit, which includes followers of Rabbi Meir Kahane. So, this shows the kind of discrimination that is baked in to the Israeli government. And Ilhan Omar is going to face a whole different firestorm if she speaks up about that. I have some good news for you today. After serving up a lot of distressing information about climate change and the future of the planet, I have good news. I am releasing today an in-depth interview with architect Vanessa Keith, and she is the editor of a powerful new book that juxtaposes the problems we face with potential extinction and the challenges that are manageable if we make a plan. And in her new book, Vanessa Keith gives us a blueprint for life on Earth in the year 2100 after a temperature rise of 4 degrees Celsius, which of course is a conservative standard. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Vanessa Keith.
If you draw a line from, say, the tip of South America across, or, the tip of South America, South Africa, sort of around there, and then you draw a line from, the United States across, that area becomes the area that's really unstable and not that great for large scale populations. And when we first did that map, this was before Hurricane Sandy, it was before Maria, before Harvey, and all of these things, before the wildfires in California. All of these things had not happened yet. And so people were, when we would present this in our in-office reviews, people would say, nobody could believe it. And people would say, oh, come on, but this is science fiction, right? And I was like, no, actually, it's not science fiction. And we got to do something about it. So that graphic that you're talking about is probably one of the most compelling pieces of evidence. And I think it really points to the power also of design thinking in giving you the ability to visualize a problem really clearly, because that map is the result of pages and pages and pages and pages of my team and I reading all of these studies and all of these articles to turn it into, okay, this is what it's going to be like. This is where you're going to have, fires, and these are the areas where you're going to have cyclonic storms like hurricanes, and all of this, you start to look at this and you say, wow, that's, why are we doing this to ourselves?
That's Vanessa Keith talking about her new book, which is entitled 2100, A Dystopian Utopia, The City After Climate Change. And I hope you will listen to this interview. I found it fascinating and inspiring because there is a path forward. We do not have to accept widespread extinction, including of humans, on this planet. And The architects that she and her team have engaged with have produced a fabulous book. The production values here, the graphics are rich and colorful and really have an impact. And I have arranged to get some copies of this to give out as bonus books for future subscribers. And when they arrive, I will let you know about that. At any rate, all of this is made possible. Well, first of all, the Vanessa Keith interview will be available later today at peterbcollins.com, TuneIn, iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And I encourage you to listen to it and to share it far and wide. And this is where I like to pause and thank the people who support my work every day here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. People like Julie Dupree, Wendy Gebauer, Mary Sue Rose. By the way, your bonus book is in the mail, Mary Sue. And Janet Price. They are subscribers to this podcast, and all you have to do if you want to join them is come on over to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber, and when you get to the sign-up page, it's an easy choice, $5, $10, $20 a month, or you can sign up for a new annual subscription and get a bonus book. The current bonus book is Dr. Justin A. Frank's little analysis of Donald Trump called Trump on the Couch. A second federal judge, this one in San Francisco, has issued a ruling challenging the plan to include a question about citizenship in the 2020 census. And Judge Richard Seaborg declares it unconstitutional, which is a much stronger decision than we got from the previous judge, Jesse Furman. And so this does seem to be heading for the Supreme Court. That would be my guess. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, Kirstjen Nielsen, who is the Director of Homeland Security, she testified that there is not a manufactured crisis on the border. It's a real crisis. And, of course, that is over-dramatized. There are more people, as I reported yesterday, coming to our border and submitting to arrest. They're not sneaking across the border, swimming the Rio Grande. They come and they ask for asylum. And while you might speculate that some of those people don't deserve asylum, we do have a policy that until Trump meddled with it, allowed people to make that claim and have it evaluated by immigration courts here in the United States. The other bizarre claim that Nielsen made is that they have uncovered recycling rings where children were used multiple times to help undocumented immigrants enter the United States by posing as being a family. Now, we haven't seen any evidence of this. A former advisor to DHS, Scott Shukart, told reporters that ICE and the Border Patrol have been making the claim since at least 2016, but there's only one case in North Carolina where it's even been alleged. And a person who is very close to immigration issues, Michelle Brane, Director of Migrant Rights at the Women's Refugee Commission, said, "I've never seen an actual case of it despite the government bringing it up several times. And if these were a serious concern for the administration, it would invest more money into smuggling investigations as opposed to cutting funds and redirecting them to arrest, detain, and deport immigrants." Now, one of the things that was supposed to be addressed by the 9-month budget bill, you know, the one they passed that ended the threat of a government shutdown, well, there was supposed to be money in there to hire more immigration judges to deal with this massive backlog of some 800,000 cases. But the head of the Executive Office for Immigration Review issued a memo that said, well, the budget process has left them considerably short of being able to fulfill all of our current operational needs. And they said in bureaucratic language, they do not anticipate that they'll be able to hire additional judges after a group of judges that's completing training is brought on board in April. 800,000 cases and no relief with new judges in the pipeline. As I've explained on many occasions, the Guardian newspaper based in London, which is completely online, they don't publish a print edition, does some good enterprise reporting in the United States. I have problems with them on Venezuela, on many foreign policy coverage matters, and Russiagate. But they do good reporting that American media seems to overlook. So The Guardian got a reporter into a migrant detention center that is adjacent to the Homestead Air Force Base outside Miami, Florida. And this is the site of a tent encampment that is referred to by our government as a holding facility. But it's a prison. And the residents are aged 13 to 17. They come from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. They came unaccompanied. And the camp, 1,700-bed facility, military-style regime. And they say, this is not a secure facility, this is a shelter. But it's got razor wire. It's got armed guards. The people who are assigned there are not allowed to leave. They have no access to cell phones or the internet. They get 2 10-minute calls a week. The average kid has been there 58 days, 3 times longer than the court-ordered 20-day limit. It's operated by a for-profit company called Comprehensive Health Services. And as of the last census, there were about 1,600 children there, 70% male. And they run it like a prison, although they do teach them English, reading, writing, math, and crafts. And speaking of prisons, our friend Dr. Jeff Kay has published a blockbuster detailed story, I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast, where he goes into some depth, based on newly available information, about the death of a Guantanamo prisoner, Haji Nassim. And his death was characterized as a suicide, which make him the 6th known prisoner to be reported as having ended his life. And Dr. Kay does a great job of taking us through the history of Nassim. He was diagnosed with hallucinations at the age of 15, and he had psychiatric episodes and psychotic breakdowns, suffered from depression. He feared that he had been tagged as an informant and that he might be killed by other prisoners, and some of them did attack him. So it's a fascinating and sad story. And I've linked to it so you can read it at your convenience. Well, the presidential race is hard to follow. I guess we need a big jumbotron here at the secret studio. But Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who thought that his re-election victory showed that he could talk to Trump voters, he is pulling out of his exploratory campaign to run for president. I think he hit the buzzsaw in Iowa when he said, oh, no, I'm not in favor of Medicare for all. Joe Biden is ready to run for president, and I hope that he will decide not to. In a report in the New York Times today that's written like a Go, Joe, Go piece, they say everybody's ready except they are looking for the full and final consent of the former vice president himself. And what is he waiting for? Some kind of a fake draft? We need Joe, said no American. Also, Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, candidate for president, is distinguishing herself from the others because she has written what she calls the only bipartisan bill that ends federal marijuana prohibition. It's called the Ending Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act, and it would remove marijuana from the list of federally prohibited drugs in the Drug Enforcement Act of 1970s. And that, as she describes it, is very simple, clear-cut, doesn't bring up any other issues that can be used as excuses to keep bills like this from seeing the light of day. And as I've said repeatedly, Barack Obama had the opportunity for 8 years with a stroke of a pen to reclassify or declassify cannabis on the Schedule 1 where it appears today. And he never did that. Michael Cohen is being attacked, predictably. And there were a couple of questionable comments that he made in his open testimony last week. One relates to whether he sought a pardon from Trump In the hearing under oath, he said, "I have never asked for it, nor would I accept a pardon from President Trump." But the Washington Post says, well, maybe he never asked for one, but Trump's legal team was dangling a pardon, and Cohen told his lawyers to go ahead and talk to them. So, to me, that's a battle over words, not necessarily facts. And the other issue is, in his testimony, he said that he never wanted to work in the White House, and there is a lot of commentary in the opposite direction. But none of this really undermines the gist of his testimony, the documents that he has provided, the plea deal he made that he was directed to commit crimes and paying hush money by Donald Trump himself. And now we know that checks were signed by Trump while he was serving as president to repay Michael Cohen for the hush money that he had advanced. Today, there is sentencing in one of the jurisdictions where Paul Manafort has been convicted, and I don't have any news yet on what the sentence will be. I expect a pretty healthy one. Yesterday, dramatic testimony by a Republican on Capitol Hill, Martha McSally. She is the appointed senator from Arizona serving out John McCain's term after she lost the race to Kyrsten Sinema in the November elections. And she touts herself as the first woman in the Air Force who flew in combat, and she led a squadron of fighters. And I take nothing away from her in those accomplishments. But she reported that she was raped, and apparently more than once, while she served in the Air Force. The perpetrators, plural, abused their position of power in profound ways. Now, she names no names. She doesn't say where it happened. She attended the Air Force Academy. And if you're a longtime listener, you know that I did a series of reports. Was it last year or the year before? I think it was in 2017, about the cover-ups of sexual assault events at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. So I applaud Ms. McSally for speaking the truth about what happened to her. And finally today, Mark Zuckerberg wrote a lengthy memo. I haven't had time to read it all, but I'm content to accept the analysis of Sam Biddle at The Intercept. Zuckerberg, he's saying that privacy, he now knows, is the big concern, and he built Facebook as a community for sharing, and his proposal is to fully encrypt the Facebook Messenger, the WhatsApp Messenger, and whatever they use for texting on Instagram. And he wants them to be end-to-end encrypted. But Sam Biddle points out that this appears to be another ploy by Mr. Zuckerberg. He says that combining the different platforms may benefit some users, but that skepticism of Facebook is warranted because at the same time it promotes its support of privacy. It has been fighting attempts to pass more stringent privacy laws for Internet users here in California. And Biddle says this 3,000-word opus is only about one new privacy feature to be released at some unknown future point. On the other hand, Facebook has a long history to consider. It's a company whose business model relies entirely on worldwide data mining. For everything Facebook protects with end-to-end encryption, that's one less thing Facebook can comb for behavioral data, consumer preferences, and ad targeting. Your chats may be secure, but that will do virtually nothing to change how Facebook follows and monitors your life on and offline. I think those are words worth listening to. Thanks for joining me today for my news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.